Washington 37, Texas 31. What a wild, wild finish in New Orleans. As you know, like you said off the top, Garrett, we were watching that game all together at the Mason home, and we kind of wrote Texas off, and that was very foolish of us to do. It was still a 2-possession game. You know, as Washington kept kicking field goals there in the second half, part of me was thinking, you know, they're leaving the door open just a little bit. And sure enough, Texas drives all the way down into the Washington red zone, gets one last play, shades of Mac Brown in 2009, right? In the Big 12 championship where he's holding up the one finger, put 1 second back on the clock. We're going to get one more shot at this. But this time, Texas comes up just short. The throw to the end zone falls incomplete. Oh, my goodness. What a track need of a game. The offenses lived up to the billing. Washington's offense was, you know, other than coming up short in the red zone and, you know, settling for field goals a couple of times, the Washington offense was flawless in this game. Kalen DeBoer and the offensive staff called a fantastic game. Michael Penix executed. He was 11 for 11 in the third quarter at one point. Just ridiculous video game numbers. You can see it on the screen there. 29 of 38 for 430 yards and 2 touchdowns. And guys, we highlighted this on our preview show. What was going to give the Longhorns trouble was their pass defense, and that certainly came to fruition tonight.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, all right, there we go.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Either way, I agree with you. Texas obviously falls a little bit short, and I know they're kind of talking about it over there in the chat, but a really questionable last couple of play calls there at the end of the game. Obviously, that dump down to the running back in the backfield, very, very questionable. I'm assuming there was other routes down the field. It didn't really show it on the broadcast. But even throwing that ball, because if you get tackled in bounds, I think they said it on the broadcast, that's the season, and that's obviously the game. And I just saw a meme on Barstool Sports that was like Texas's last 4 play calls, and it was like a scribble scrabble sheet that was drawn by like a 4-year-old. Like that's what it seemed like, is that there was really no structure. And I do commend them for, you know, going down the field and making something happen and making it a game and getting in the red zone, because that was obviously a really good play calling couple of plays there. But once they got in the red zone, I mean, they had a couple shots at the end zone, which one they wasted on that dump down, and then a couple jump balls. I feel like they could have got down there, moved the chains one more time, made that clock stop, then go for the end zone. But I guess it's just Monday morning quarterback. You know, you can sit up here and say that all you want, but a great game, like you said, Trey, for Michael Penix. He was dealing. I saw people talking on social media that he was playing mad. He didn't win the Heisman. He was doing this, that, and the other. And 430 yards, 2 touchdowns, looked really poised. They ran him a little bit. And I know Dylan Johnson got hurt in those last minutes of the game, which ended up kind of giving Texas an opportunity to score him back in the game. But either way, he had a very phenomenal game. And all the way, a great game from Washington. They stay undefeated on the season. And Washington-Michigan will be a good game. But in this Sugar Bowl, like you said, Washington kind of let it slip away. Texas made something out of nothing and made for another instant classic.
Yeah, a couple of turnovers from Texas as well. Fumbles in the second half really set the stage for Washington to take control of the game. Again, ultimately almost let it slip away, but they were in control there at the end. Garrett, you know, as we look at just this performance from Washington's offense, it wasn't just one guy, right? They were spreading the ball around. What impressed you the most about that performance?
I think Michael Penix's poise was just remarkable. To be in this spot, to be, you know, in a playoff spot, hadn't been there before, right? He had been, you know, championship spot was his biggest so far for his conference championship. And to be able to go in here and make, I don't feel like I saw him make too many bad decisions tonight. I mean, he knew when to tuck it and run, knew when to throw it away. But, man, he knew that he could trust his guys downfield. He was slinging that thing. I mean, just absolutely just crushing it down the field, going vertical. A couple of huge plays over the top that really set him apart. You know, for anything, I thought that the funny thing today, and we'll talk about this especially with Michigan, but it felt like both teams that won today made some mistakes or maybe made some questionable decisions throughout the game that let the other team kind of stay with it. Washington felt like the better team for the vast majority of this game. And then it was just the little mistakes. They couldn't quite punch in touchdowns that let Texas stay in this game. We'd even talked about a little bit, tonight that, they go score touchdowns on a couple of those turnovers. This thing's wraps. This is a, 45 to 50 point effort from Washington. And who cares if Texas scores at the very end of the game? It doesn't matter. Right. And so the fact that it was as close as it was, I think partly, you got to tip your hat to Texas on defense and, keeping Washington from scoring there. But, I think they're going to have to put out a slightly more polished product if they're going to do anything against Michigan. That defense today for Michigan looked pretty dang good. But, to have the trust that they had in their guys, right, to be able to say, Rome's down there somewhere, right, and to just chug it up and say, hey, I'm going to believe in my guy down the field, right? That was huge. And to be able to do that, I think, was a massive, massive credit to Washington, to what they've built through the year. And there's a reason I picked Washington to win this game. It's because I trusted Penix to be clutch when he needed to be. And despite some mistakes and despite not the perfect game, he was poised. He made overall smart decisions with the football, and he ultimately didn't cost his team anything. And honestly came up with some huge plays down the stretch to keep him in it.
Yeah, and I'll go off just one last thing on this is it honestly seemed like in both of the games, and especially in the second game between Washington and Texas, it seemed like the winning team was playing less scared. Like it just seemed like Michael Penix was playing free. He was out there running. He was throwing the ball into tight windows, and he was making plays. And it seemed like in that first game in the Rose Bowl, with a couple bad snaps from McLaughlin, the center, Jalen Milroe was playing kind of timid. He wasn't making throws. The play calling was really short. They weren't making a lot of plays down the field in the passing game. And a lot of run plays with Jace McClellan. And he was a great running back. But at the end of the day, I feel like Washington and Michigan, and especially in that late 2-minute drill that Michigan pulled off, like they were moving the ball down the field. That catch by Roman Wilson and a great throw by J.J. McCarthy ended up putting them in the position to win that game.
Right.
Michael Penix threw for 430 yards. They threw it almost 40 times. You know what I mean? And so the trust and the ability to try and push the ball down the field and be really aggressive ultimately paid off. It seemed like, as Texas was also aggressive, it just kind of seemed like Washington wasn't afraid. Alabama seemed afraid with those bad snaps. And as their defense played really good, their offense just couldn't get the job done. So I feel like the aggression from the two winners today, it like you said, it caused some mistakes. It caused a couple turnovers, especially on the Michigan side of things. They almost shot themselves in the foot with that muffed punt there at the end of the game. And so a couple of mistakes from both sides, but overall it was really fun to watch these two winning teams come out, be aggressive, and it's going to make for an interesting final two teams with both those guys coming in hot.
Yeah, and a quick thing real quick, I'm going to point this out too. Fumbles killed Texas in this game. Yep. They absolutely killed Texas in this game. I know that they had a couple of like muffed with the punts and whatnot, but man, it just seemed like fumble, balls on the turf, coughed it up, couldn't keep control of the ball. That, ultimately killed Texas because that turned into some Washington points, and they didn't convert all those into touchdowns, but even just kicking field goals was the difference in this game, right? It's 2 field goals is your difference right here. So for me, I look at this and I say, man, that just really, really sucks that Texas wasn't able to keep control of the ball. And even if they don't score on those, it's a tie game, right? Because those are 2 field goals that you keep off the board. If you find a way to go down, score any points on those, you win this football game. And so, man, it sucks to see that, but that's part of the game, right? It's turnovers are a part of the game. And, at the end of the day, it's going to be something that, the Texas running backs and the Texas players are going to have to look at themselves and say, man, we were that close. It was just the little things, right? It was just the little things, the little bit of execution that they couldn't pull off that ultimately ended up biting them.
Yeah, it was the turnovers. They were the huge ones, but the procedural penalties also really biting the Longhorns. Only 66 penalty yards, but 10 penalties total, backing them up about 5 yards at a time every single time it seemed like. And it always seemed to come at a big pivotal moment when they needed to convert a first down, back them up 5 yards. Guys, I want to highlight a couple more just maybe unsung heroes for the Washington Huskies today. Rome Odunze gets all the headlines, and rightfully so, but Jalen Polk, 5 receptions for 122 yards and a touchdown. Jack Westover, the tight end, had a great game. 6 receptions for 59 yards, did a lot of the dirty work, getting a bunch of yards. I remember I listened to a part of this game on the Longhorns radio network, and Craig Way and his color commentator were just so frustrated at Westover getting, these big chunk plays on second down and setting up third and shorts over and over and over again. This down the stretch in this
Some
game.
Really impressive snags in that game too. Westover was kind of an unsung hero, like you were saying. Just some big snags and some big spots for him.
Yeah, and Michael Penix, just one last thing about him, just making some outstanding next-level NFL-ready throws, zipping it right past a couple safeties on one of the touchdown passes. Just, I think he made himself a lot of money tonight if he wasn't already up there.
Yeah. Well, someone else I want to highlight, Jabbar Muhammad played a fantastic game outside. These Texas receivers are extremely talented, and as a whole, they didn't have a lot of success against them. I know there were some, like, obviously when you play receivers that talented, like, you're going to give up some. But, I mean, as a whole, he kept those receivers in check. Xavier Worthy, caught 2 balls for 45. Looking up and down here, Adonai Mitchell, obviously 4 for 32 in the touchdown, but not massive receiving numbers there. Overall held the receivers in check for Texas, and whoever he was lined up against in whatever situation did a really, really good job out there on the perimeter. So need to shout him out because a lot of people were, trying to on the broadcast. I heard him a couple times saying there was a mismatch because he was short. I remember a time when having a shorter corner who was extremely athletic and talented to the ball wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And so I want to shout him out a little bit for knowing how to play a ball and competing out there, doing a good job.
Yeah, and I'll build off that just a little bit. He obviously had a super impressive game. And one of the big things that kind of concerned me coming in was obviously I picked Texas. I picked Texas to win the game. And one of the main reasons for that is Texas just had so many weapons. They just seem like one of those teams like Washington on offense just has a weapon at every spot, right? All 3 receivers for Washington, like you said, Trey, can make plays. But the same thing for Texas. Xavier Worthy didn't have the best of games, but I thought maybe, hey, Jordan Whittington will step up or Jaden Blue or CJ Baxter will step up. And the kind of key piece that I anticipated going in was Jatavian Sanders. And he's super, super talented, super, super quick and athletic for his size. He had a decent game, 6 catches, 75 yards, and made some big catches down the stretch. But ultimately, I commend Washington for being able to kind of restrain him as well, because like you said, understanding your job out wide and stopping some of the best receivers in college football is obviously one of those main game plan points. But stopping a guy like Jatavian Sanders from, ripping you up, I think that's what separates kind of like a great team, national championship team. And then maybe a not so good team is going to say, okay, we have Adonai Mitchell, we have Xavier Worthy locked down on the outside, but Jatavian Sanders, and I saw it multiple times throughout the game, including Alabama early in the season, just continue to rip him up in big moments. But either way, I feel like he was a leading receiver, but he didn't get in the end zone, and it was ultimately a successful task for Washington and pass coverage in general, like you said there, Garrett.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Garrett.
I was going to say, only thing left on this storyline for me is just, man, it really feels like that was Texas's opportunity, right? Like, this is stuff we'll talk about all offseason long, I'm sure, but man, as Texas is coming into the SEC and they're going to have to go up against, Georgia and Bama and Ole Miss and Tennessee and like whoever
Michigan
else
in the non-conference next year.
Yeah, and next year Michigan non-conference. I mean, this is just going forward, even not just next year but beyond. Like Texas is still a really, really good football team. If they can keep their roster together, they'll still be extremely competitive. But they're still going to have a harder path next year than they had this year. It really felt like this needed to be a moment for Texas, and man, it's gotta suck knowing that you were that close, right? You were that close with, opportunities to, maybe it was, a couple of fumbles or a couple of penalties or just something, but you were that close to a national title before transitioning the SEC. Like, I'm not saying they can't compete in the SEC, but man, like that road is going to get so much harder for them going forward. Just has to feel super empty right now on that Texas sideline and that Texas fan base, knowing that you were that close.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how they respond next year. Man, that ESPN broadcast seemed to be ready to just kick Quinn Ewers to the curb and usher in Arch Manning down the stretch there. That was just, I can't believe they actually went that far with the production. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's going to be fascinating to see how they respond. Guys, one last thing I want to shout out for the Washington Huskies. Their offensive line did not give up a sack tonight, and that's huge. That was a big battle that we circled going into the preview on this one. Texas defensive line versus Washington's offensive line. Big victory for that offensive line. They had a lot of holes in the run game as well. They kept Michael Penix clean. He scrambled around a little bit. He had to run just a little bit, but big victory for the Huskies right there, and it led directly to them winning the actual football game.
Gracious him.